Hello, Megan.
How are things up in sunny Boston? Is it still sunny up there?
It is remarkably sunny. The mood's a little saturnine. The Red Sox lost last night, so there's a little panic in terms of sports up here.
I feel a little weird being the Yankees fan who's suddenly advising a Red Sox fan on how to endure this kind of pain, but...
I actually think Ross Douthat actually had a great post up actually on the fact that he doesn't want he wants the Rays to lose because otherwise they'll suffer from Florida Marlins syndrome, which is a belief that once they make the playoffs they'll just win the World Series automatically. But they need to suffer a little bit, like Brewers fans or Cubs fans, certainly.
Well, I feel like I suffered through the Winfield years, and now I'm having PTSD flashbacks, basically.
I see. I suffered through, God knows, much longer than the Winfield years for the Red Sox. So I have to admit, though, given the amount of injuries they've got this year, I'm just taking however they do from now on as gravy.
Well, this year I get to call my father and gloat. He always calls me and gloats when the Yankees get pushed out.
Uh-huh.
I come from a mixed marriage, which
right.
It's always the children who suffer most. So my father calls every year and gloats when the Red Sox do better than the Yankees in the pennant series. So I can't do that, but I can gloat if and when the Red Sox do not make it.
My brother is a Yankee fan as well. He has yet to call me on this, though. Although maybe after watching this, he will try to call and gloat. But really, he kind of knows. I mean, you're not really in that strong a position to do that at this point.
Yeah. So, speaking of other depressing things, the economy.
Yes. Well, all right. Let's start off with some good news, which is as we're doing this, which is Tuesday. I believe markets have not collapsed today, and in fact, markets did pretty well yesterday. And although the TED spread is still way too high for me to be comfortable, it's going down. So I guess my question to you is the worst over?
I don't know. There's what traders like to call a dead cat bounce.
Yeah.
Which is that anything will bounce back if it falls from a high enough height. Mm-hmm. And I have a suspicion that this may be in that category. There's been this cycle over the last year, right, of things are bad, and then the Treasury or the Fed does something. Mm-hmm. And then people decide that things aren't so bad, and then they get bad again. And so, the last Blogging Heads I did was with Eve Smith of Naked Capitalism, and she had predicted, there's going to be an end-of-year liquidity crunch when people clean up their balance sheets. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear to me that this is going to last beyond the first sort of, fingers of that peaking into November.
I don't know. I'm a little more optimistic for the following reason. First of all, this time around, it's not just a case of the U.S., the Fed and the Treasury saying we're going to do X, stabilizes markets for a little bit, and then you see a collapse. I mean, what you're seeing is both the U.S. and Europe taking relatively active intervention. Plus, you've got the coordinated interest rate cut, not just by the U.S. and the ECB, but by, I think, the Bank of Japan. China endorsed it. Switzerland, India, a few other places also did it. So you are having more global intervention, I think. That might be one reason to be reassured.
Although I find that a little disturbing in the sense that at this point we seem to be playing follow the leader, but not even the leader, just follow the first mover. So Ireland, moves to guarantee its deposits, and then everyone has to follow. Britain moves to nationalize its banks, and then everyone else has to follow. It seems like whatever government takes the most extreme action, all of the other governments do it because otherwise their banking system, people flee it. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, we're back. Little technical glitch there. But John Quiggin of Crooked Timber had this post where there's a lot of liberal triumphalism out there, Dan. I don't know if you've noticed.
I have picked up on this. Yes.
But he said, look, people. There's this flight. The first move, basically, right, was when the British government nationalized Northern Rock, and they actually had to stop taking new deposits because it was perceived as being really safe. And John Quiggin was like, well, this. He was really excited. And he said, this is the resounding answer to people who are market triumphalists. And he's like, well, of course. People like the idea that the government can grab money from other people and use it to bail out their bank accounts. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is not like some big shocking revelation about the government that the free market types didn't recognize. The issue is, what else is the government doing when it nationalizes the banks? And that's a big concern I still have.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. has taken the least extreme action in terms of having the preferred shares and so forth, but they nonetheless remain a major shareholder. They may not have voting control, but the mere fact of those cash flows gives them a certain amount of leverage. Mm-hmm. And when you look at company, I really don't understand why everyone is so excited about nationalization on the liberal side. When you look at countries with nationalized banking systems, in general, what you see is highly political allocations of assets in a way that, for the long-term health of the economy, really isn't a good thing. And you look at someplace, even like Japan, where the banking system isn't nationalized, nonetheless, the combination of the cultural and the government pressure to keep propping up dead companies, made the recession last twice, 3 times as long as it should have.
Well, okay, I mean, let's break this down. I think you have to parse between the sort of liberal triumphalism that you're talking about. But I mean, to be fair, I think there was a general consensus among a lot of economists that this was the route to go. I mean, before Gordon Brown took it for the UK. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was that collection on Vox EU that Barry Eichengreen and Richard Baldwin put together, most of whom were suggesting that something like this was going to have to take place, correct?
I think there were sort of 2 major economist-endorsed plans, either of which I think would have been better than the original Paulson plan. Right. One was pushed by Luigi Zingales of Chicago, my finance professor, who was basically talking about sort of forced write-downs of debt collectively. For the same reason. I mean, really what you're looking for, as I blog today, people are looking for a pooling equilibrium. The problem with any of these recapitalization moves is that if banks avail themselves of them separately, they send a bad signal to the market. Right.
I mean, and this is why, as I understand it, the Treasury plan forced all of the banks, regardless of health, to take the capital.
So all of the economists were pushing some sort of pooling equilibrium. Yeah. And one of the problems with the original Paulson plan was that you had a negative pooling equilibrium almost, right? If you didn't offload some securities onto the Fed, people would wonder what was left on your balance sheet. Whereas if you got rid of it, so you were possibly forcing people who really shouldn't have sold things to sell them anyway. But yeah, the Fed is basically forcing people to take recapitalization in exchange for preferred shares, and I think that's absolutely better than the original plan. I think Paulson sort of just couldn't, in a way that I think is understandable, in part because he's a product of the system, and in part because sort of transformative change, doing anything radical is always more frightening and often less wise than incremental change. Yeah. Precisely because you don't know sort of what the knock-on effects of radical change is going to be. So what he was trying to do was just sort of like keep the system limping along. But I think in the last week it's become completely clear, as it was to a lot of economists beforehand, that it couldn't just limp along.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of, there's something radical needs to be done with the system to restore confidence and get banks delevered.
Because not enough radical was done yet. Taking over AIG, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, that's small potatoes.
Well, that's the terrifying question: is what's next? If this doesn't work, and for me, you've studied this a little, I know as well. So for me, like when about 3 weeks ago, I got a message on a libertarian email list that I'm on, where this guy basically said, like, look, I don't understand why this is such a big problem. Don't we know that what happened in the Great Depression is that the Fed contracted the money supply unnecessarily? And I'm actually reading Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman is the person who put forward this thesis first.
Yeah.
Ben Bernanke, his thesis work was on shoring up that theory, of advancing that theory, really. But my question is, like, how much can we know about any of these crises, right? They're all, we basically, for crises in large countries that, like, borrow in their own currencies and are sizable industrial economies and aren't sort of, like, highly integrated with neighbors or so forth, how much data do we have? We have the Great Depression, we have Japan.
Well, there's Sweden, and there was Sweden, there's...
But Sweden's like a really different case in a lot of ways, right? Like, it doesn't have... in a lot of ways, it's a tiny country.
Yeah.
And, like, what is it? Something like 40% of GDP is owned by one family. So you're essentially, when you're doing this stuff, like dealing with a couple of investors. It's a very different situation from a major economy. Like Finland's GDP moves with Nokia.
Right.
So small countries, and Sweden's is like measurably affected by IKEA. So, little countries like that, I think it's a lot harder to say, it's a lot harder to hold them up as a model for what can happen in a big economy.
Well, my take on this is, I think Brad DeLong had a post about a week or two ago that I thought put this accurately, which is, that Ben Bernanke and Henry Paulson are bound and determined not to repeat the same mistakes that were made in the run-up to the Great Depression. They're going to make new and completely unanticipated mistakes.
Right. And that's exactly sort of my issue, is like we thought, until a year ago, we thought we knew how to deal with another major financial crisis, right? Like we thought we could pretty much avert this. And actually, like, one of the things that I was trying to track down was there was a decision by the SEC in 2004 to let the 5 major investment banks increase their leverage, basically increase the amount of debt they had held relative to shareholder equity for lay viewers out there. Anyway, why did they do this? And it wasn't because the regulators were venal. I mean, the Democrats and the Republicans voted the same way. It was because they really thought that advances in economic theory and better computer models would let them see this coming and head it off. And it turns out that our economic theory didn't work that well. And so what I wonder is, like, a lot of the stuff we thought we'd learned from the Great Depression didn't work in Japan. Is the stuff that we thought we learned from Japan not going to work here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. The difference between Bernanke's approach to this and Friedman's believed that the problem was a liquidity crisis, and that because not enough liquidity was injected into the system, you had a Great Depression. Bernanke's position I always thought was slightly different, which is Bernanke's position is it's not just liquidity. If the banking sector collapses, and that can be for liquidity reasons, that could be for solvency reasons, what have you, that's the real problem. And so, in essence, Bernanke is saying you've got to adopt a sectoral approach, which is you have to prop up the finance sector in order to prevent the real economy from really going under.
Well, I'm reading the Great Contraction period piece right now, and from Friedman's Titanic Monetary History of the United States. And two things really struck me. The first is that he's utterly savage about what the Fed did to the banking system. It is mostly about liquidity in the banking system. It is about the failure to prop up the banks. And also the ways in which both the Hoover and the FDR administration dealt with the problems of liquidity crises in the banks. So to that extent, it's not clear to me that it's that different from what Bernanke is thinking. But one thing that's really interesting, that just keeps coming back to me, is that, in the Great Depression, there were 2 banking crises. There were, and the second one was the one when, like, they had the bank holiday and so forth. And it seemed to be getting better for a while. And what he says is, it's not clear why the second banking crisis happened. And then he just kind of moves on, and he starts talking about other things. But that's a big thing. Why did the second banking crisis happen? Why did this follow? And I don't think we have an answer to that. And that's what keeps me awake at night. Is that thing. We can talk about how the Fed reacted, but I wonder if, we haven't made too much of what's really a pretty limited data set, because we don't have a lot of places to try out new theories of what works. And the reason that I think, like, Sweden, in the same way that Iceland's different, right? Like, the EU could come in and recapitalize Iceland. There's always excess capital to come to someplace like Iceland or Sweden from outside.
Well, right,
and help fix the banking system.
It is to.
Where's the capital going to prop up Japan or going to prop up the entire Western European U.S.? That amount of capital doesn't flow.
No.
And that's why I think the big crises are substantially different from little ones.
Fair enough. All right, so. But this does lead to an so you're worried that there's still going to be more crises on the horizon. I mean, I think I have to admit, I'm less freaked out now than I was 2 weeks ago when I did my last Blogging Heads with Bob Wright.
I would say that's true of me as well.
The one thing that I find, I still am genuinely surprised by this, and this really is, I'm not sure if it's an indictment of markets or if it's an indictment of the way the mortgage market was regulated. in the end, I mean there are sort of three separate issues that are going on right now. The first is the immediate financial panic, which governments had to step in and arrest. The second issue is the fact that you still have this what's so-called toxic debt, that no one quite knows what the value is. And I mean there's genuine uncertainty. It's not risk. It's not people can place a probability on what the value of it is. No one actually knows how much this stuff is worth. It could be worth nothing. It could be worth, close to 80% of the value.
Right, the risk premium in the market has gone way beyond the actual amount of losses, either expected or current in the mortgage market.
So that's the second issue. And then the third issue is the real economy, in the sense of how all this, what's happened, will actually affect things like unemployment, output, and so on and so forth. Now let's put off the third one for a second and deal with the first and the second. You can argue that the first one, the panic at least, has potentially slowed, and I'm quasi-confident that it's not going to be as bad as it was for the last 2 weeks. It's that second thing about the debt and about these complex mortgage debt securities that still amazes me that no one still knows how much these things are worth, and it's not clear to me that anyone has come up with a mechanism to determine how much these things are worth.
No, I don't think anyone has. I would say that in a way that worries me the least, because I think that the risk premium on that debt is so high that I can't see it getting higher.
But don't you think it has to come down at least a fair amount before you're actually going to see the finance sector being willing to invest more in the real economy, I guess?
I think that your investment's going to drop dramatically no matter what happens, because all of these investment banks, all of the banks really, commercial banks, investment banks, they need to delever. They need to clean up their balance sheets, and they need to get their debt to equity ratios way down. And so it almost doesn't matter what happens with those particular securities. The fright that they've had is going to cause them to lower their leverage ratios, even if like tomorrow we woke up, the housing market had gone up 20% and everyone stopped being worried about the mortgage bonds. The mere fact that this has just happened, both regulators and bankers are too frightened.
Oh yeah, no, and I agree with that. I think the thing that astonishes me is that it's not even if there's to some extent if they were told the debt's not worth anything, that would be bad, but at least there would be certainty. The thing that's bizarre about now is that no one honestly knows. These suckers are so complex that I'm not sure anyone knows how much they're actually worth.
No, they don't, and they're idiosyncratic. Yeah. And one of the big problems is that there's this sense that like the person, unlike other kinds of securities, right? Like if you have a normal bond, if you have like a share of stock, where it's basically fairly standard, right? Like a standard corporate bond, a standard. Unlike that, there's this sense with these securities that the owner of the security has a lot of asymmetrical information, that they probably know much more about it than you do. And so no one wants to buy it because the mere fact that they're selling it,
is a signal of they must not put...
It's the Lenin problem. Yeah. And I think that's what the Fed was trying to overcome. But, I think one of the things that FDR did do right, and FDR, to challenge the liberal hagiography that has gone, FDR did an astonishing number of things wrong. He just did so much crap that some of it, like almost by default, was correct.
Right.
But one of the things that they did do right was they sent out bank examiners to figure out which of these banks were liquid. What I don't understand is why Paulson has not simply said, like, we have our crack audit team, and they're going over everyone's mortgage portfolio. If you hold mortgage bonds, you hold mortgage CDOs, you have to open your books, and we're going to look, and we're going to decide where all the flows are, we're going to trace it all back, and we're going to put a value on these things. We're going to, not put a value, but at least tell you where the cash flows are.
Right.
And I don't know why this has not been done, but it seems to me like that would be an excellent first step.
I assume one of the reasons is just time. I mean, one of the ways in which this crisis has played out, which is, I don't know if it's different, but I mean, it's striking to me, is the simple fact that events happened much, much more quickly than I think policymakers both anticipated and understood.
Right. Absolutely.
And this is actually one area where I do think the economy, one of the things that's startling is that the evolution of this TARP plan, of the Treasury plan, and not the UK but the EU mainland, is startling in the sense that the economists were the ones advocating direct injections of bank capital. They were doing this 3 weeks ago. Paulson kept going, pshaw, we don't need to do that. And then, boom, now everyone has basically come on board with that in response to what Gordon Brown was doing.
Right, and I think it's like, I wonder first of all if the economists or the economic policymakers shouldn't have taken a lesson from the political scientists, in that I think the political scientists are more prepared for things to just randomly go wrong for no apparent reason at any moment. Maybe I'm wrong about that?
No, I think we're just more humble about our inability to predict the future, perhaps.
Well, like, you read the Guns of August, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone's been talking about war for, 5-10 years? Mm-hmm. But everyone kind of, just talks about it randomly, and then suddenly in, 14 days, everyone's at war. No one predicted that particular moment was going to... So, in part, this was kind of like that. Like, everyone had been talking about, well, there's problems in the mortgage market, et cetera, but I don't think anyone, even, Nouriel Roubini, even the extreme doomsayers, thought that it was going to go down in, 2 weeks.
Well, no, although to be fair, Roubini did predict, he predicted a lot of what's actually happened. He did it, 2 years ago, and again, you got to give him props for that.
The problem is he's also predicted 9 out of the last 1 recessions.
Right. Yes, no, that's...
he was 4 years ago completely convinced that we were going to have a massive dollar crisis that was going to trigger all this. He's always been convinced there was going to be some sort of terrible doom, but the triggers have changed over the years.
Yeah.
But the predictions of utter financial collapse have not.
Yes.
Which, this is the problem, and I think that I've said this before, but economic pundits, I think political pundits too, but especially economic pundits, have this problem. They're kind of like executives with out-of-the-money stock options, in that, there's no penalty for being wrong, and there's no payoff for being right in the way that everyone else is right. The payoff is only to people who do extreme things.
Yes.
Who say extreme things and then get proven right, and then they can dine out on that forever. It's like Zogby, right? He predicted one election correctly 10 years ago, and everyone still listens to him, even though he's gotten every one since then wrong.
Right. Josh Marshall had a great post earlier this year during the primaries, I think, about how he always thought, making this point that he was talking with someone else and thinking, the other guy was talking down Zogby, and Marshall said, yeah, but every once in a while he really gets one right. And the other guy says, yeah, he gets one right every once in a while. That means he sucks.
Right. And that's how I kind of feel about Roubini. Mm-hmm. He got a lot of this right, but he got a lot of this right 5 years running and had 4 different causes that he predicted were going to trigger this collapse. So how right did he get it?
Well,
the stock clock is right twice a day, right?
Yeah, but... I don't know. Look at it this way. I think what he did get right was the magnitude of what's actually happened, which I think is much bigger than even a lot of the doomsayers would have predicted.
I'm more inclined to credit Nassim Taleb, who I think really did, and Benoit, hard to pronounce, Mandelbrot, who really both nailed this. They didn't nail the particulars, but they nailed the exact problem of the way that the bankers were pricing risk, which is that they weren't pricing in extreme events. They were acting as if there was a normal distribution curve with very narrow tails.
Well, speaking of economic pundits, we should probably offer kudos. Yesterday, Paul Krugman won the Nobel Prize, or the Swedish bank, whatever the hell it is.
The Nobel Medal.
Yes, the Nobel Medal in economics, which has led to predictable reactions from various aspects of the blogosphere, either rejoicing or chagrin. What's your take on this?
I think it was well deserved.
Yeah.
His trade stuff was a titanic rethinking of the landscape. I think the fact that he got it alone when almost all of the Nobel Prizes in the last 10 years have been shared, and been shared by people in really often not very closely related subfields.
Right.
I mean, Kahneman and Smith don't really do
anything.
Even close
Yeah,
to the same
they're
thing. They're just sort of, random things we didn't think about before. Go. And so the fact that he got it alone and the fact that he got it in the last year of the Bush administration tells me that the timing was political. But that said, I think that Krugman absolutely deserved it. They didn't pick him because he's mean to the Bush administration. I think saying that is ridiculous. I have a lot of disagreements with the way that his punditry has gone over the last 8 years. But that said, I think that anyone who's trying to discredit his academic work is just ill-informed.
Well, unfortunately, you've stolen my line. I mean, that's there's no question the Nobel is deserved. Everyone knew the Nobel was coming, 10, 15 years ago. And he's written not just, he was awarded it for his work on location and the role of location and geography in terms of affecting trade flows. But, he did it, he was also a key mover behind sort of new trade theory or strategic trade theory. And he also wrote an extremely influential article about exchange rate targeting zones back in 79, I think. And also, he didn't get the Nobel for this, but he's also an exceptional writer in terms of someone who can actually make economics relatively understandable to the layperson. But I also tend to agree with you. Everything that he has done, he's done with people, or there are other people who have also contributed. And it is startling that he got the Nobel by himself. And you do have to wonder if that was sort of a way to kind of twist the knife a little bit, particularly that it was the last year of the Bush administration. But there, people who claim for some reason that he didn't deserve it, that he's not that good of an economist, don't know what the hell they're talking about.
They have no. It's. I haven't seen anyone who's even vaguely credible as an economics commentator say that he didn't deserve it.
No, although I don't know if you said Henry Farrell has a good collection of. It's more comments to blog posts about the fact that Krugman got the Nobel, but various sort of right wing. Commenters saying, no, he's a communist, he's a socialist, blah, 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 all that stuff. And they're all kind of pretty over the top. But I don't know anyone who thinks he didn't deserve the Nobel. Except perhaps, maybe, Jagdish Bhagwati.
Well, you've got to feel bad for Bhagwati, right? This is, I think, sort of lowered his chances. Right?
Yeah, that's, Bhagwati was one of Krugman's mentors. It's never a good sign if one of your students gets the Nobel before you do. So I wouldn't even think Bhagwati would think Krugman doesn't deserve the Nobel. Bhagwati would just think he deserves it first.
Too. Yeah.
But
and I have to say, I agree with that. I don't think that Paul Krugman should have gotten the Nobel by himself. I think that there are, the stuff that he did is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But is he a Phelps? I don't think so. And there are a lot of people who did stuff in his subfield.
Yeah.
Who, sort of credibly could claim to deserve it. And so I think that singling him out and leaving those people in the cold, it does look political to me. And, whatever, fine. I don't care if the Nobel Prize sort of wants to slap the Bush administration in the face. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's slightly unfair to sort of dampen the chances of other trade economists getting the Nobel Prize in order to slap the Bush administration.
Well, furthermore, in some ways you can argue it's actually a little unfair to Krugman. Admittedly, he gets all the prize as a result. But the problem is now there's going to be the allegation of the prize was politically motivated when, again, he deserves the prize. It's not an issue. It was just, did he deserve the prize by himself as opposed to, I don't know, you could take Brander and Spencer, although I don't think they deserved it, maybe, but Grossman, Helpana, and others, Rudiger Dornbusch, there were plenty of others that could potentially have earned, collected this Nobel as well.
So now there's always going to be a little asterisk next to it in a bunch of people's minds, and that isn't fair.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, so moving on. The next topic, I think, is that both Obama and McCain have put forward, economic plans in response to this crisis. Have you had the opportunity to take a look at them?
A little bit. I've unfortunately been laid loaded with bronchitis, which last week literally had me flat on my back gasping for breath. So I haven't, and I'm just, it's like one of those weird, I sleep like 12 hours a day now. But that said, I've looked at both of them. The McCain plan, when will the Republicans stop trotting out, tax cuts are like the ginseng of the Republican Party now, right? It doesn't matter what goes wrong, tax cuts fix it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have hangnails, tax cuts are good for those too. On the other hand, the Obama plan, letting people withdraw money from their 401ks, awesome. Let's defund the capital system. Just when the banks are going down, let's pull money out of the stock market and the bond market. That's exactly what the country needs right now. It's not necessarily bad for me. I want to buy a house, and I might take money out of my 401k to do that if it becomes completely penalty-free. But in general, I'm sort of underwhelmed with both of them. I think that the Democrats and the Republicans pushing massive stimulus on top of an extraordinarily expensive bailout plan are irresponsible.
Well, all right. Let me offer some mild pushback on that, which is, again, remember I talked about there were sort of three economic crises: the immediate panic, the business with the toxic debt, and then the real world economy. I mean, by any metric that you look at, the real world economy is actually going to be in trouble, and what's happened over the last 6 weeks isn't going to make anything better.
Right.
So, I mean, you are going to see unemployment creep up a fair amount, and there is going to be, growth is. I mean, I have to assume we're in a recession now, even though it hasn't been officially dated.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Right.
Too.
So, I mean, something's got to be done. What would you have, assuming McCain had, finally come and asked you and looked into your green eyes and said, Megan, what should we do? What would you have recommended instead?
Well, let me push back on that.
Okay.
I am
Your
not
eyes are
sure
not green?
that something has to be done.
Oh, okay. There you go.
About stimulus.
Yes.
I think something has to be done about the banking system. But stimulus in general isn't very effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's not effective for a couple of reasons. First of all, it takes a really long time to work its way through the system. It takes about 18 months, and by the time it's worked its way through the system, the stimulus isn't needed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just getting all of this stuff right. Like, nothing's going to happen until Obama gets elected.
Right.
And therefore, my prediction for the day, Obama is going to get elected. Nothing is going to happen until Obama gets elected, which means that by the time there's an actual stimulus package, by the time everyone's settled in and so forth, it's going to be too late to be effective.
Okay.
Second reason is that people tend to save the money if you give it in the form of tax, either like tax cuts or sort of like cash distributions.
Right. My understanding is that's what happened this go around this last year.
Yeah, about 2/3 of the money gets saved, which means that you're basically borrowing money in order to give people money to stick in their bank accounts. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a weird way to recapitalize the banking system. I can think of way more efficient ways to do that. What I think is necessary is to, instead of trying to, I mean, the economy has been sort of going, we've been running at full throttle, we've been running in overdrive, really, for a long time. And I don't want to sound like the Austrians, like, work the rot out, but in some sense, you can't just keep pumping fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus into the economy. I think it needs to rest. What I do think we need to look at is how do you alleviate the pain of that. And once again, I'm going to be kicked out of the Libertarian Club. But I mean, I think that things, some of the things that the ways that Democrats want to spend the money, right, is reasonable, not as a mechanism for stimulus, but just because
to cushion the blow.
I mean, expanding on unemployment benefits. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to me that you should extend them to a year. Make sure that we've got enough money to cover things like food stamps, S-chip, etc. Like, make sure that the money is there for people who are hurt by this. But I don't think that what we need to do is try to pump more money into the economy in the assumption that somehow the American consumer can be goosed into keeping the whole thing going. I don't think that this is not fundamentally like a demand-led recession. It's a supply shock, and you can't stimulate your way out of a supply shock.
You really think this is a supply shock now?
I think it's a combination of an oil supply shock, although that's easing
now,
and a credit supply shock,
Okay, I mean I buy the credit story.
Right. So you can fix the credit supply shock, but I don't think that you can, on the aggregate demand side, sort of stimulate your way out of the fact that there's just a credit supply shock.
All right. Well, then here's the Obama has basically been making this point, but it is something that even I find mildly appealing, which is the following argument. What's causing the current economic downturn is, as you said, spikes in commodity prices that happened, in the first half of this year. We're now going to be facing a downturn, and in terms of job creation has been, off for, 9 months now, I think?
Yes.
Therefore, the solution to this, if you're going to prime the pump, is to prime the pump in public goods that would presumably help prevent further commodity shocks, such as, energy diversification and or infrastructure projects. I have a hard time arguing against that, except with the standard mantra of the government probably wouldn't do that great of a job. I mean,
Well, here is the problem.
Okay.
I can argue against infrastructure projects. Okay. I've had this discussion with my father. My father, worked in the heavy construction industry as the head of a trade association there.
Well, it doesn't have to be heavy. I mean, by infrastructure, I'm not necessarily talking only about roads. There are other things you can...
Right, no.
Yeah.
But here's the issue with all infrastructure projects, basically. They take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right, so, for example, Ryan Avent, who blogs at ryanavent.com, and who I'm very fond of, and is a big, heavily into public transportation and so forth, he's been saying, well, states have a backlog of projects. Well, states have a backlog of projects that they've costed, right?
Yeah.
And they may even have bid them.
Mm-hmm.
But the construction firms aren't sitting around just, hanging out with full crews, waiting until the state comes up with money. That's not how construction firms operate. So if you want to do a new infrastructure project, forget it. It's going to take you years because it's got to go to public review, it's got to, et cetera. But even stuff that's already been sort of gone through the EPA process and any public hearings or whatever, you still have to put it out to bid and get contractors to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, they're not just hanging out, and it takes time. All of that stuff takes an enormous amount of time, and by the time you've done it, again, your crisis is past. So I think, the idea of infrastructure is nice, and in a lot of cases, I'm in favor of government infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to sort of entertain the idea of privatizing the roads, but given that they aren't private, I think we should make them be nice.
Right.
But I don't think that, again, it's not a good way to funnel money because it's not quick. If we're going to do it, we should do it because we're going to do it, not because, in the same way that I think if we're going to do unemployment insurance, we should do it not because we're trying to goose the economy, but because we want to make sure people don't starve while they're out of work.
Right, so these are things to be done because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a fiscal stimulus.
Yeah, and I think that, the part of the problem with me for this, and I think hopefully for all libertarians, is that crises get harnessed to whatever stupid thing politicians want to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not stupid. But they get harnessed to whatever, we need new roads because otherwise the terrorists will have won, or whatever it is. We should make the argument for infrastructure projects on the grounds, on, the case for infrastructure projects, not on the, if we don't do this, the economy's going to fall into a chasm. Because building new roads or putting up new buildings or bridges or public transit, changing the signal system, whatever it is, they're either good or they're not.
Well, I think this leads to a nice sort of final topic of conversation, which is what the future of capitalism is going to look like. We should be able to tackle that in 2 minutes or less. But, one of the effects of this, and Henry Farrell and I had not an exchange exactly, but talking about whether or not what's happened in the last 6 weeks is really going to be leading to a norm shift in terms of how people think about capitalism and the role of the state in capitalism. I, sort of cautiously said, look, we don't know what this means yet because the state has intervened before, and then, it hasn't necessarily meant that it's increased its role. The last time the U.S. had to intervene on this size or this magnitude in terms of its financial sector was during the S&L crisis,
right.
And that also, happened to coincide with the triumph of the liberal economic order, so it didn't mean all that much. It strikes me there are two ways you can think about this. The first one is to say, historically over the last, 100 years or so, there's been this sort of yin and yang between, maximum state intervention and minimal state intervention. And generally what happens is that you go in one direction and then the problems of that direction reveal themselves, either in the sense of excessive regulation or insufficient regulation, and then in response the course is corrected and you veer in the opposite direction, you then go too much and it goes back. So one way to look at this is that this is just, we're seeing the turn and we're going to be probably moving back towards more state intervention, but eventually we're going to move back away from that again as well. The second version of this or the second argument, I think, is sort of the Robert Higgs one, the crisis in Leviathan one, which is that in any kind of crisis situation, the state steps in, and when the state steps in, it never recedes. And therefore, by stepping in now, it is unlikely that you are going to see the state recede, not just anytime soon, but anytime for a long while, in terms of its role as a regulator and funder of the finance sector.
I would argue for the first view in the finance sector. I think that the problems of this will become apparent. Corporate bank, in countries which have nationalized more aggressively than we have, the problems of state ownership will become apparent. People will look at more competitive banking sectors and get jealous, which is what they did the last time around.
Right.
And I think, there's a tremendous amount of triumphalism among the liberals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. Remember 2001 when the neocons were convinced that, the world had changed and everyone was now going to agree with them? How long did that last, right? They got their realignment for 5 years? 4?
Yeah.
And then someone in charge screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, again, don't be too confident that the crisis of the moment, which indeed does push extremists. Crises almost always push extremists into the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that they're going to stay there. There's I think a lot of underestimating how contingent history is.
Mm-hmm.
That if Al Gore had been elected in 2008, he'd be dealing with exactly the same problem.
You mean 2000?
Pretty much. 2000, right. He'd be dealing with exactly the same problem, pretty much, and the Republicans would be arguing that it was a problem of corrupt Democrats and regulatory failures, too much regulation.
Well, that hasn't changed. I mean, that is still the Republican argument, isn't it?
No, that is. But they would be succeeding.
Oh, I see. That's
Whoever's
your point.
in charge gets blamed.
Yeah.
Right. Whoever happens to be in charge when anything goes wrong gets blamed. And so, if a couple hundred votes had gone a different way in Florida, this would be an argument for less regulation, not more. So
let me see if I get this straight. The moral of this dialogue, then, is that libertarians will rue the day that Bush won in 2000 because otherwise they...
Well, haven't we already?
What? Well, yeah.
Haven't we already?
But in terms of economic ideology, it would have been beneficial had Gore gotten the blame for this instead of Bush.
Sure. I mean, I think to the extent that I think is true, which is that libertarians are more comfortable with Republican economic policy than with Democratic economic policy. They would have been better off if the Democrats had been they would have been better off if Kerry had won in 2004. They would have been better off economically with Democrats in charge of the recession. We might also have been better off in many other ways. Yeah. But speaking of that, maybe we should close by asking, is the prestigious Dan Drezner not endorsement forthcoming?
Oh. Well, wait, have you made a decision? Hold on.
Oh, yeah. My deep and passionate loathing for John McCain and everything he stands for in the Republican Party, I think, is well known, much to the anger of my conservative commenters.
Well, look at this way. I know who I'm voting for. I wouldn't call it a huge endorsement, but I am probably going to vote for Obama.
I'm definitely voting for Obama. I was thinking of voting for Bob Barr.
No, I can't do that. I never can vote for I only vote for one of the major party candidates. That's just a...
Well, I think in a way it's cheap, right? Because unless you are actually neutral between the two, and how often does that really happen? Right. It's fine for me. I live in D.C. It's fine for you. You live in Massachusetts.
Yeah, no, the votes don't count, but I mean, presumably they count in the sense of if we're going to be public figures about this,
right? Who
do you support?
In the sense that, I am voting with my preference. My preference is for Barack Obama. Yeah. After the way that John McCain sort of unbelievably incompetently demagogued the financial crisis.
Yes.
And also, I might add, the narrative about what happened, and I'm certainly not a Republican insider, but from what I understand, he scuttled the deal and got the Republicans to hold out for what was a substantially worse relief package than the original one, with a lot more earmarks and pork and crap stuck on it. So, that sort of, I was never going to vote for him before, but even if I had been vaguely tempted, that would have torn it. Barack Obama just has behaved better throughout all of this than John McCain has.
Well, for me, I think it was the Palin pick. The best spin I could put on the Sarah Palin pick was, maybe this is like when George H.W. Bush, picked Dan Quayle, which was not the greatest decision, but in the end, Bush was a great, I would argue a great president, actually. And this was, a not a great example of his decision making.
Right.
The thing is that everything since that decision that McCain has done has turned to ashes. It's stunning the extent to which he, has not seemed to have any. He has not seemed to have any consistent kind of message.
Except that he really hates Barack Obama.
Except that
were you aware that he was a prisoner of war?
I found that out. But that basically...
It took a lot of digging,
yeah.
But I spent some hours on the internet and I came across a little-known website.
Well, you know what we could do? We could start the rumor that McCain is actually Muslim. I actually hear McCain was a secret Buddhist. That he was converted in the POW camp. And he was actually converted to Buddhism, and he's secretly going to impose the Buddhist order if he's elected president.
Right.
But
he's part of the International Buddhist Conspiracy.
The International Buddhist Conspiracy.
I have to say, possibly the funniest comment on all of this was a friend who's Orthodox over Yom Kippur, sort of came back, and he's like, we leave you in charge of the financial system for one day? And I was like, what are you talking about? I think we may have to, think about taking the management away from the International Jewish Conspiracy and, giving it to the Danes.
I think so. I mean, it's not been a good, it's not good for the Jews. No, I think my take on the McCain-Obama thing is, I'm going to vote for Obama. And the reason is simply, I don't know what the hell John McCain would do if he's elected. Except, apparently, fulminate and react instinctively if any foreign leader says anything asinine about the United States.
I also don't think that what you really need in a time of massive economic crisis is someone as impulsive as McCain.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, what he's demonstrated is that he actually has the absolute worst instincts to be an executive at this point in time. And actually, the thing that struck me during this campaign so far is that McCain is better off as being a senator. I'm actually comfortable with John McCain being a senator, because then he's one of 100, and he actually is right every once in a while. But he doesn't have any executive power in this situation. Right. And therefore, he can actually say what he thinks, and the times when he's right, he'll get credit for, and the time when he's wrong, it'll be revealed. I mean, in the end, what's striking about Obama is that he actually does seem to have the right temperament for the job, which is he doesn't instinctively and impulsively react. He actually wants to take a breath and see what the hell's actually going on.
And he doesn't. He is not really. I mean, he's demagogued this a little bit, but not the way John McCain has. He's gotten some of the commercials that have come out.
Yeah.
Have been like,
well, look, I'm not. This kills me because the one area where I actually think McCain has been quite competent has been on trade policy. And it's the area where I think Obama has been easily the most demagogic. But
yes, absolutely.
The election is about more than just trade. And as much as this kills me to admit that, I do think that's the case.
Well, I also think, for me, trade's a really important issue, but it's also like a dead letter. And it's been a dead letter for years.
Yeah, it is.
The Bush administration was totally gung-ho on trade and couldn't get anything done. I don't see the McCain administration going anywhere.
No, if anything, there's a chance that Obama could potentially get a trade if this all turns out to be smoke. I think Kerry Howley had a post on this. If he actually does want to, advance trade further, only Obama can go to Congress and get TPA renewed. And the other thing, the thing about, I think Obama in terms of demagoguing this, I will give him credit. I think when the first moment when this crisis, broke out, I actually wasn't thrilled with his rhetoric because he kept talking about the difference between Wall Street versus Main Street, assuming that it was an either-or thing. And I got to give him credit because I think about a week in, he actually did change the rhetoric where he pointed out, I think in the last debate also, look, it actually is Wall Street and Main Street. That there's a reason why you need to inject capital into Wall Street because in the end, helping them actually does in the end help Main Street.
Well, I actually saw him give a speech today where he said, and let's be honest, some people some bankers lent people money for houses that those people couldn't afford, and some people borrowed money they knew they couldn't afford for houses they knew they couldn't afford. I mean, he's been more reasonable. I mean, like, I don't want to take away. McCain has had a couple of moments that I've really respected him, like when he told the crazies with the conspiracy theories to just put a sock in it. I really admired him when he did that. But in general, I think that Obama has been much more level-headed and has not demagogued things in a way that put him in a position where he had to do something really stupid. And McCain has had that problem several times. He's opened his mouth, and then he's sort of had to go back and do something.
Well, the fact is,
even if that thing was stupid,
the difference between the two of them in the end, and partly this has been the nature of the campaign, but McCain is much more risk-loving than Obama has been. And risk-loving presidents at this point scare the ever-living crap out of me. And so, in the end, I just can't do it. And I have to say, for those people who are out there probably assuming, oh, Drezner, you're just doing this, to kowtow to your liberal academic friends, I will say this decision actually cost me, because I actually had to. I had a network that wanted me to provide blog commentary for them, but to do this, I actually had to say that I'd voted for McCain, and in the end, I couldn't do that.
Well, there's actually, I mean, it's funny, Julian Sanchez had a post today that really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, every so often, someone will accuse me as a libertarian of just being a sellout to my corporate interests, and I'm just doing this because, that's where the money comes from. It's like, if there's any position that pays less than libertarian pundit, but similarly, the people are now saying, oh, well, you're just saying that you're going to vote for Obama because you're trying to get in with, the liberal media so that they'll reward you. And it's like, how many spots are there for moderate Republican commenters? Not that, like, David Brooks pretty much has it, right? Like, there aren't that many slots for centrist Republicans. And, so positioning yourself there when David Brooks looks to be in fine health, and God willing will be with us for many years to come, like, it's just silly, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm voting. I dislike McCain because I dislike McCain. I'm voting for Obama. I'm going to hate the Obama administration. I'm fully convinced. I have nightmares about what happens if Obama comes in with 60 Senate seats.
Well, see, I have to say, there is one final reason I think I'm voting for Obama, and this is, I can't deal with moral hazard in politics. You know what? The Republicans basically had the reins of power for 4 years on their own, and then, in the executive branch for 8 years. And I don't think there's any case you can make that says that they've succeeded on that much at all. And so, you know what? The party deserves to be punished for this.
Yes, I completely agree. What I want is a Republican Party that I could vote for.
Yeah.
But this is not that Republican Party.
Yes, I tend to agree on that point.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
No, this is not the party I knew when I was growing up. All right, I believe my kids are getting unruly, so unfortunately I need to... they're upset that I'm voting for Obama as well. So with that, I think we've got to get going.
Okay, well, it was great talking to you, Dan.
Great as always.
And hopefully I'll see you soon.
All right, take care.
Cheers.